Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What Makes You Click. I'm delighted tonight for this Christmas special, which is why we're wearing these hats, in case you're watching this in the middle of the summer. Maybe we can start a new fashion craze. I'm joined by Pilley Bianchi, who, amongst other things, apart from being a trainer herself, and also a very accomplished musician and singer, and I have heard her sing on YouTube, at least. We might see if we can get her to sing some answers, I don't know. You've got a lovely voice.
Thank you.
Is the daughter of John Pilley, who you may or may not know, but you may know his dog, Chaser. Chaser was described as the smartest dog on the planet. She knew over 1,000 words, over 1,200 words. And prior to that, there'd been publications on dogs having a language of about 200. And I'm really pleased that you're here tonight so we can have a bit of a chat about Chaser, about you, about your dad, etc., and all the other related things. And we're going to, as I said, this is the Christmas special, but I'm not sure I'm going to stick with this hat because this keeps hitting me in the face.
Well, toss it to the other side. Daniel, thank you. Toss it to the other side.
Well, then it disappears and people just think I've got, I don't know, I look like I'm a Cossack then.
Okay.
But
well,
anyway.
Daniel, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to have a bar stool at your pub.
Well, thank you. You're welcome, and cheers. Let's and happy Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas.
And that's not the end of the chat tonight. We're not saying goodnight at the end of it. So there is no Bianchi. There's obviously the surname Pilley, but you're known as Pilley. Your real name is Debbie. You're the Debbie in the book.
Right.
So why don't you use your name? Let's start with the basics. Why don't you go by your name?
Well, when I was in college, my friends always called me Pill and not Debbie. And so I've just gone with it. Debbie didn't really, after a while, didn't seem like me. I kind of felt like I was wearing somebody else's underwear when people would call me Debbie. So, my family actually called me Pill. So, and it's a little more, as a musician in New York, it certainly gave me a little more memorability with my name. When I was starting out in a career, I didn't have a last name at all. I just used Pilley, and that kind of served me well.
So it's just Pilley is just as the one name, like
like Cher.
Cher. Okay.
Madonna.
There we. Yes, thank you for helping me out on that senior moment. I'm trying to think. Single name. Okay. Adele. No, hang on. Adele is her name. Anyway, so you're trained as a musician, but you're also obviously an accomplished dog trainer as well. Is that just absorbed from your father, or how did that come about?
Well, that is correct. I grew up with animals. We grew up with animals in our home, and my dad being a behavioral psychologist, no family pet was off limits as a science fair project. So we really cut our teeth in his lab when he was getting his PhD at University of Memphis, hanging out with the rats and pigeons. And then we had our own dogs and horses, and we always had to use our own animals for behavioral learning, and by the time my sister and I were in the 6th grade, we understood stimulus control and operant conditioning, and we had learned a whole repertoire of how to teach our dogs stupid pet tricks. It wasn't until we saw Letterman that we realized what we were doing had a name. So with the stupid pet tricks on his show, we just thought we were having fun with the animals. And through this experience with my dad, really gave us the foundation of positive reinforcement. Everything was about positive reinforcement. The harshest words that my dad ever spoke to me growing up were, honey, I'm not going to reinforce that behavior. And those were the most painful words in our household. And it's like, damn, I hate it when he says that. That means he's going to ignore me doing this, which, extinguished that behavior pretty quickly. So
I don't know if you know. Do you know the story of Skinner? No, it wasn't. Was it Skinner? No, it was Watson. Was it Watson or was it Skinner? No, it was Skinner. Skinner's children.
Skinner, yeah.
So Skinner's children, he basically put into a. The story goes, and I don't know if it's true or not, but he put them into basically a cot and thought they will self-toilet train themselves. I will not put them in nappies. They will learn through conditioning to avoid feces, etc. And that way they will, be more rapidly toilet trained. And apparently this is what he did. But what I heard was...
Did it work?
Well, I don't know, but all I know, well, the rest of the story is that his daughter, when she had kids, immediately put them in nappies. So I don't know that. I don't know. So I don't think she quite went along with it.
What works and what doesn't work, and we grew up with a lot of B.F. Skinner in our house, and my sister, when she was in probably the 9th grade. For her science fair project, she made her horse's stall into a giant Skinner box. And she was remarkable and taught her horse how to press the bar for food, and it worked. So yeah, Skinner had a place at the table around our house.
So did the horses have any vices, repetitive behaviours? Or not? I'm just intrigued because if you got them to press bars for food, whether or not.
Well, that's the thing. Yes, they did. And my horse was an Appaloosa gelding, and he was not. I got him when I was in the 6th grade, so I was about 11, 12 years old. And of course, my father immediately wanted us to teach them something. Whenever you get an animal, you have to teach them something that's going to enrich their lives, and it's going to cement these sort of methods behaviorally into our brain as kids. So he wanted me to teach my horse to stretch out. My horse was a young gelding. He was just under 3 years old. So he didn't know a whole lot. He was not a very good riding horse. I was really the one that was sort of breaking him in. And so in order to teach him to stretch out, I don't know if you do this in the UK, but for Western riding horses, you squeeze their withers, they stretch out, and you can get up on them more easily.
Okay.
I didn't really need this because my horse was only 14 hands. I didn't have a problem getting up on him, but my father thought that this would be something fun to teach Cochise. The problem was we were able to teach him how to stretch out, but the only issue was he would never do it when I wanted him to. He would do it when I wasn't looking, and I would find myself with my friends trying to impress them with my horse. And they would say, "What is your horse doing behind you?" And I would have a sandwich or a carrot or something in my pocket. And behind me would be my horse that was completely stretched out so that his belly was close to the ground, his neck was out, and it was an embarrassment. And I had to say, well, don't mind him. And Cochise stopped doing that. So yes, they learned things that we really didn't extinguish that kind of behavior. We just enjoyed the horses for who they were, and we kind of let them do their thing.
Well, that's the way it should be, I think. So let's talk about Chaser. And if people some people may or may not know about Chaser. There is the book, which actually I have read. I've read actually in the last couple of weeks. I thought I must. It's been on my shelf for a while, and I thought I'm going to chat to you. So I actually managed to get through the whole thing in 2 weeks. And I don't know why I hadn't read it before, but probably just because, I don't know. I've got lots of books on my shelf. But so the book Chaser, and one of the things that strikes me about, well, early on, your dad makes it very clear that he had other dog loves in his life, and Yasha.
Correct.
Um,
Yes.
and I don't know, this is a terrible question to start with, but I'm going to start with it. If your dad had to choose between Yasha and Chaser, who would he have chosen?
Oh wow, is that a trick question?
No, not
I
at all.
think.
It's just. I mean, his love of Yasha really comes through. I mean, and his love of Chaser does as well. But everybody's heard of Chaser, so I'm just going to give Yasha a little bit of airtime on this.
Well, Yasha was, I believe, his soulmate.
Hmm.
You know, they had the same sort of spirit. They were both adventurous, gregarious, up for anything. Um, and Chaser was a softer dog, but she and my dad were also very similar, that they were obsessed with concepts. Chaser was obsessed with play. My dad was obsessed with knowledge and learning. He had a dogged determination, and Chaser was a perfect match for him in that regard. So it's hard to say. Um, Chaser was great for him in his later years
Hmm.
because he did more. He was in his late 70s and 80s when he got
Hmm.
Chaser and worked with her. So she was very athletic and gave him opportunities to run her with the sheep and to go on bike rides with her. Where with Yasha, he went whitewater paddling with my dad. He did a lot of rigorous mountain biking and hiking with him. So it's hard to say. They're totally different experiences for different eras in his life,
Hmm.
and you couldn't really have one without the other.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because obviously the book, I guess, Chaser is the dog that people know, but there is a whole section, and not just there's not just a whole chapter. He comes back to Yasha several times in the story as well, which just strikes you that there is this, really strong emotional connection with Yasha
Completely.
at various well, yeah, as you said, and probably say it relates to the time of life. So one
But
thing
also
which
the thing about Yasha too is that Yasha was his original research partner
mm,
that a lot of people don't know. Yasha was the dog that he brought into classrooms.
hmm
So he was working with rats and pigeons, and it was Yasha's brilliance that really showed him that there was a depth of cognitive understanding with dogs, and he could learn behaviors very rapidly. So this made my father think it's going to be way more interesting to bring dogs into the classroom than work with rats and pigeons. So Yasha um, was the dog that inspired him to get into research with dogs.
so yeah, and he talks in the book about Yasha in the classroom, especially student projects and whatever. And we have a similar system in our work whereby staff bring in their dogs and students use them for teaching all sorts of things. Um, but uh, when what drove your dad to suddenly think about the language? I mean, what but maybe better just for people listening in case they don't know the story. So in the sort of early 2000s, Juliana Kaminsky published a sort of landmark paper in Science on a dog called Rico,
In
um,
2004, yes. Mhm.
2004, where she talked about the language ability of this dog had about a vocabulary of over 200 words. I don't know if you know this, by the way. There is a suspicion that I heard that Rico was poisoned and killed. And so when Juliana did some of her later work with dogs like Betsy, she wouldn't reveal the identity of the owners or anything like that because there was a feeling that somebody might try and kill off these subjects for whatever reason.
Wow.
Judging
I
by your
didn't,
face, yeah, I was going to say, judging by your face, I don't think you knew that. If people are just listening, they don't catch your face on the. But yeah,
yeah,
that's,
I don't, I didn't know that. I knew that some of the dogs in research were like, I believe Betsy was, or was actually a boy, or yes, I knew that there was some sort of protecting their identities, but I didn't realize that with Rico. It was Rico.
I think it was because of what happened with Rico. So this paper came out in Science, and I'll tell you my little story, because I know your dad talks about trying to get published, etc. When I read the paper, had very similar thoughts to some of the commentaries that came there about, although clearly Rico had a remarkable ability, the paper as published, there were a few questions about, well, there are other ways that this phenomenon could occur. And as it happens, we'd just done an experiment on dogs' ability to backward condition. So if you said thank you in the name of an object, they could remember the name of the object, having retrieved it. The bit that was missing was the attraction to novelty. So Rico seemed that the argument, again, just for people listening in, the argument with Rico was not just that Rico had this remarkable language, but Rico could do this reasoning by exclusion. So if there were 3 objects and Rico knew the name of 2 of them, and you said go and fetch the whatever, splud, and Rico had never heard the word splud before, then Rico would reason that the 3rd object must be a splud because it knew that the other 2 weren't. And so that was the basis on which the work was published. And as I said, there was a commentary. It's a remarkable ability, regardless of anything else. And so we then ran an experiment and said, well, if dogs are just attracted to novelty, then it might be that in the absence of direction to the alternative, that they just pick up that one because, it's a novel object, it's a new one.
Yeah.
And with the backward conditioning, it can work. So we ran that experiment, and sure enough, we found that situation that the dogs are attracted to novelty. We wrote to Science and said, look, this is an alternative explanation. We got a letter back from Science that sort of said, well, we don't take rebuttals less than 6 months after we've published, more than 6 months after we've published the paper. And so, well, we had to do the research. And, there's been a few papers that have started to question, and we'll talk a little bit about how Chaser learned as well. So there was that paper that came out.
When but was I thought Chaser that in the Rico So in the Rico paper, I don't think that they had any conclusive evidence that Rico was learning by exclusion.
No, this is it. And I think this is the thing. They made the claim, but there were other explanations, and that's why we ran those trials. And we couldn't get it published, so we published the 2 bits separately. So whenever people say, oh, well, right. Yeah, no, there's the criticism. Now, Chaser was born in 98, is that right? I think?
No, 2004.
Oh, Chaser was born in 2004. Okay. So was it that paper that inspired your dad to think about it, or he'd already been thinking about it?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, Alston Reed, who ended up being the co-writer of his first paper, who is really the statistician for the paper, saw the article that came out after Dad had already started teaching her the names of objects.
So what drove your dad to think about?
That's a fallacy that's been written saying, oh, Rico inspired him to do his language learning. And they keep getting it wrong. What inspired him was when Yasha was around. He had tried to teach Yasha the names of objects. And he was unsuccessful in teaching Yasha the names of objects independent from a verb. So he would have Yasha go get a newspaper, and which Yasha would do immediately, go get it and bring it into the house. And once the newspaper was in the house, Dad would hide it and say, go find the newspaper. And Yasha was confused. He's like, I don't get it. I got the newspaper. It's not here. It was out there. And now I got it. What do you want me to do? So what my father tried to do was teach the names of objects that kind of had no value to the dog. He wanted to teach Yasha the name of a rope, and objects, a sock, things that Yasha didn't really engage with. He liked the newspaper because it was the action of going to get the newspaper. So it was because of this type of research where he wasn't able to show that nouns and verbs were independent, that he said dogs cannot learn proper nouns. They know, all they know is their own name is a cue to look. You know, so the name doesn't really have value. It's just, or meaning, it's just a cue. And I said, well, that, I used to have arguments with my dad and say, that makes no sense, because what else is a name except to look, you know, and it has a function, but I know that your dad and this is mom. And I think that the dogs understand those sort of things. I argued with him that he was doing it wrong. There was something that was flawed in his methods. And what he discovered, where his work, where he'd gone off the deep end, is that he wasn't paying attention to what had value to the dog. And it was around a campfire during a retirement. He was going to a lot of border collie trials, and he was fascinated with the nuance that farmers could use with their voices to extract these complicated commands and informations, and this tandem teamwork. It was creative. It was on the spot, you know, and they were able to execute these maneuvers with this nuanced sound. So he was sitting around the campfire with these farmers, and he said, you know, your dogs are doing great things, but science shows us that they can't really learn nouns independent of verbs. Your dogs don't even really know their names. It's just a cue for them to look. And he had this sort of espousement among these farmers, and there was dead air, silence. And one of the farmers said, is that what science shows us? Well, I want science to tell me how come I can call out Jeb and out of 5 other dogs and ask him to go get Millie and Tilly, and he'll do it every time. What does science say about that? And this humbled my dad. He was like, wow, I got it wrong. I got it wrong. I'm going about it the wrong way. So that was when my mother decided she was going to give Dad a present for Christmas. And that was a dog from legendary breeder Wayne West. And his goal with her was to teach her human language. What he always wanted to do was teach human language. And it wasn't just nouns, but it was a whole communication system. And he knew in order to teach a language, you had to have a vocabulary. So he was going to start with the names of objects, and those objects were her toys. And he knew in order for the object to have value, it had to be fun. It had to be something meaningful to the dog. And he knew that she loved to play. And the best way for doing that was with her toys. So what a lot of people don't realize, even in learning anything, is that, for instance, we were asked to weigh in on a study about short-term memory. And there was a study that came out, I can't remember, was it maybe 6 years ago, that dogs don't have short-term memory. They just forgot the hug you gave them. And what we discovered was dogs don't have bad short-term memory. It has to do with the value of the memory. And it's just like humans going into a party, and you're introduced to a bunch of people, and their name goes in one ear and out the other. And it's not that we don't have the ability to learn the names of people, we just don't care enough. And that's when dogs don't learn something.
Don't say that, because I'm terrible at remembering people's names.
Exactly.
You're saying I don't care about them. You're saying I'm a horrible person. I like people. I just don't remember names.
Right, but if it was, say it was like Meryl Streep, I don't know who's a famous actress right now.
Yeah,
Meryl Would Streep. You remember I know her name?
Probably depends. I don't know. I don't know.
Right, but if you really want to remember, you'll remember,
I tell
right?
you, I'm at meetings and I literally, on a piece of paper, I write the names of the people in the order that they're around the table so that I can, and I keep having to refer to it because I cannot remember the names of the people. I'm just terrible. Anyway, so enough of my disabilities.
Right.
But
But if something has value to you, you're going to be much more likely to
more
remember
likely,
than
yeah, I
something
guess
that doesn't.
more likely to. But yeah, so that's in relation to that with the language, and I think that's one of the really neat things that comes with with the Chaser story is Chaser is clearly a very playful dog, and I think that's a really important attribute in relation to this because and there is a danger that with the growth of positive reinforcement, certainly in the UK, and I don't know if it applies the same in the States, is everybody seems to be focused on food. And actually, food is not necessarily the best reinforcer. If you think
Right.
about Skinner, his animals were on starvation rations. Food
Right.
meant something to them.
Right.
And this idea of sort of, well, we'll use treats and things like that. Well, okay, but the dog might not be interested in food. The dog is with you, and that's a social occasion. So you want a social reinforcer, and play is the way that you build friendships.
It is. It's where you build confidence as well,
Yeah,
with the
absolutely.
dog. It cements the bond between human and animal or any kind of relationship.
But
If there's
I
play.
think that's one of the really important things here is the use of that. So we did some work, and we only published it a few years ago, but we did it a long time ago. And I actually tried to see if Daniela was available. Daniela Ramos, who did the work when she was at Lincoln, but she wasn't free. So I'm going to do a separate one with Daniela because Daniela worked with the dog Sophie in Brazil, that you may know of, a
Hmm.
street dog that
Hmm.
had a remarkable ability and also ended up learning to use a keypad to communicate. And but yeah, we looked at the use of nouns and verbs, etc. And one of the experiments that we did was, well, we thought initially it would be quite straightforward, and the idea was sort of teaching the animal the names of objects or and teaching them to do different acts towards certain objects. And basically, what we found was that the dogs learned the sort of the actions relatively well, as much as they can to them in effect it looked like a ball was a fetchy thing or
Right.
pointy
Exactly.
thing, and so it
Yes.
had some meaning in that context. But just teaching them, and I'm sure it was maybe the methodology that we used, but just trying to teach them the object when they had the same action towards it, and then bringing them together and getting them to distinguish between the objects, the vast majority of them failed with the
Well,
dogs.
that's interesting that you bring that up. So, what the methodology that my dad uses, and we see this with a lot of people, um, uh, that they are not fully grasping, is that he used errorless learning, which we know is a simple concept used in science that makes it impossible for the student to fail. So what he would do is he would take, and this is how he taught Chaser the names of objects, because you're right, it's very hard to isolate the verb from the noun. So what he did was he took a blue ball and he put it on the floor and he showed it to her and said, Chaser, this is blue. So he would roll it to her and he'd say, catch blue. And then he would uh, uh, take blue. Then he just hand it to her. And so he would be pairing different verbs, find blue. He would put blue right in plain sight. So she couldn't make a mistake. So he started pairing different verbs with one object. So this way, she
And
learned the name of,
yeah,
and you don't introduce a new object until she could find this object in another room successfully.
And I think that's, yeah, as you said, I think that is a really important tip for people if you're trying to teach the names of objects, is that give a variety of actions in relation to it in order for them to realize that all of the behaviors, you know, are focused. So the actual name of blue, as you say, actually means something in the context of all the other things, because they're the various behaviors. And this is what came to us. And the interesting thing, as I said, when we looked at the data, and then we sort of had looking at the dog's different behaviors, they had I think one dog succeeded on the objects, but quite a few of the dogs succeeded. And I should point out, the dog that succeeded on the objects was a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, not a Border Collie. Yay!
That's the thing. That's the thing, is that we don't believe it's a Border Collie thing.
No.
Yeah,
but
that's great.
It's so rare that it's something. But when it came to the actions, more of the dogs got it, and there were a big variety of dogs there. And and I think, you know, it sort of makes sense if you think about it from an evolutionary point of view. If you're out hunting with a dog, actually the dogs with proto-wolf or proto-dog wolf type thing, they know which is the best prey to hunt. You just have to direct their behavior to stop them from doing various things, or how to do various things. So controlling action rather than directing towards objects, you would think that there's a much greater predisposition to making those associations. But I really like that observation that, yeah, if you really want them to understand the object, get them to do a variety of actions around it, and then the object word actually has meaning. Because we were saying, well, if you, for the actions of the objects, you should certainly teach them within a discrimination context. Now, again, you said your dad used errorless learning, but at the same time, he talks a lot in the book about creative learning. And there's the quote, you know, don't intervene if the child can solve the problem, which means they've got to be allowed to fail in various ways in order to build the confidence to be creative.
That's a very good point. But this gets back to his other philosophy, is that learning builds upon learning. So in the beginning, when you're working with a dog, dogs are very sensitive to the word no and failure. That it's not something that builds confidence. So when you're first starting to work with your dog, we don't want to introduce a situation where they can make a mistake. So eventually, once Chaser had a greater understanding of words and behaviors, and he was then able to let her problem solve. But in teaching the names of objects, that's not where you give them creativity. You know, that's that you want to get the foundation first before you can build the house.
Yeah. So that brings you to one of the other things that struck me in the book, which somewhat surprised me, is this use of the word no. And I personally, you know, I think no is a really difficult concept for a dog to get. It's a difficult concept for anybody to get, because it means so many different things. And Ian Dunbar always taught me to use instructive reprimands rather than just no, you know, i.e. say it in a certain tone of voice what you want the dog to do, and then the dog realizes it's made an error. But I get the impression from the book that, your dad was not afraid to use the word no. And I mean... And
that's and you bring up a very good point. The tone of words has the nuance of the way we say words. That has meaning to dogs. I mean, listen, they're great observers, but they're great with their nose, but they listen all the time. And Chaser was very sensitive to loud noises. She didn't like arguing. So he got very accustomed to using a soft voice with her. And so whenever she would do something, he'd go, no, Chaser, no. And no became a directive. He would also play hot and cold with her. So define an object. And so we would hide an object or a toy in the room. And so we'd say, okay, find flippity flop. And so she'd go looking around, and we'd usually put it where I was out of her sight. And we had to make attempts where we didn't have scent involved. So sometimes we'd have to throw an object. And so this game was like yes and no. So if she was going in the right direction, yes, yes. And if she was going in the wrong direction, go no, no, no. So no became simply a directive to stop what you're doing
or do something else. Yeah.
Yes, it's like no did not have a negative connotation to her. It was simply a directive. And if we said no, that really, that sort of no was like she stopped in her tracks.
Okay, yeah.
So
it was a sort of a freeze on that. So we're sort of talking about this sort of the shaping versus the creative learning, and your father seems to be it's a shame I never met him, but a great advocate for creative learning, letting individuals explore. And he makes the point that people take the stuff from Skinner and whatever, and everybody's focused on the reinforcement, but that is sort of, you can't reinforce behavior that isn't occurring. And there's a whole other bit that seems to be largely ignored, which is the fact that, well, what causes animals to offer operant behaviors that you can reinforce? And again, I think this is where the play is really important as well, because if an animal is in a positive emotional state, and I was chatting actually to a colleague about this earlier today, then if they're secure, they're more likely to be exploring and wanting to learn.
That's right.
And that's
right.
And that's where, again, the play is really important, because in play, animals are trying out different things. So getting a massive amount of operant behavior that you can actually reinforce. Whereas if you're just, if you're not creating a playful context, the animal might not be stressed or whatever, but it might be quite happy to really do nothing as well. Whereas,
well, and play is we believe, or what my father believed is an innate behavior in dogs, and it's an innate behavior in children. Dogs and kids have a lot in common, between this perpetual joie de vivre, when it's done right. They have this sort of youthful spirit, throughout their toddler years. And also toddlers have an increased obsession with repetition, so their love of repetition just exceeds our exhaustion of it. So with Chaser, she found the best playmates really were kids, because they could repeat things over and over again. So sometimes she would get tired of one game, and she'd have to switch it up a little bit, but it didn't take a lot to get her excited about if it was a stick or a ball or chasing. And
oh, your camera's gone off.
Oh, sorry.
That's right, you're gonna hit something. But
sorry, there we go. Sorry. But what we've gotten a lot of letters from people say, my dog doesn't like to play. We've gotten them toys. They don't. Well, that's also, I think it is so sad. So a friend came over, he had a new puppy, and he wanted me to work with her. And he said, Ruthie doesn't like toys. And I said, well, what do you mean? We bought her all these toys. She doesn't like to play with them. And I was like, well, what do you do with them? Do you play with her with them? And he goes, no, we just figured she'd play with them. And I was like, wow, okay.
How are your
first
kids?
of all, it's the engagement. So we had her in my backyard, and I didn't have any toys here, but I had a pine cone that Chaser had left behind. And so the dog really wasn't engaging too much. And I was a little concerned that this young dog didn't like to play. So I started tossing the pine cone up in the air and catching it and dropping it and running after it. And I would call it pine cone. I have a pine cone. And then finally the dog started following me, and I tossed the pine cone, and she went racing for it. And I went racing for it too. So within 10 minutes, this dog was fully engaged in playing and had learned the name pine cone. So it's people don't realize that. And you said this, I can't remember who this was with in one of your interviews, where you said most people won't really engage with their dog more than 10 minutes a day. Mm. When people are trying to solve behavioral issues. And if people would play more and get silly and try to engage with their dog, I think that they would not only discover they're going to have a happy dog, and they're going to be happy.
Absolutely. And this is what I'm increasingly trying to do. And it's a very fine line when you're dealing with people who are really stressed over their dog's behavior. But I try as soon as I can, and I don't always get it quite right. Sometimes I step in too soon. Is sort of, you've got a dog, you've got a sense of humor. And, let's get away from the idea that this is a problem. Here's a great learning opportunity. You can learn lots about dogs because of this dog. And you might have said, oh yeah, you've had 5 other dogs and they've never caused these sorts of issues. Yeah, okay. So now you can really learn something about dogs because this dog is different. And, let's have fun learning about your dog. And that's not to belittle the stress and the problem that you're facing, but it's trying to turn a negative into a positive so that they want to spend the time with the dog and do the right things. But it's easy for me to sit here and say that because I've not got a dog that's trashing the house, and trying to, but if you can just get people into that mindset, you need to manage the risks. That's the first thing. You got to manage the risks first. Then let's have some fun sorting things out.
Exactly, because if we don't try to reshape our relationship with the dog, if it's always anxious or and the dog knows that we're not happy with them, and your experience isn't being positive, and it's starting to affect your relationship just like it does with humans. So it's a small price. It's a way to divert not only your negative feelings, but give the dog something pleasant, a positive experience, because again, it's about building confidence, and that's means yours and the dog. And you can't have confidence without small successes, and they can just be baby steps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, and I think it's just, this idea that, have fun with your dog and see what happens. You should learn as much as the dog when you're having fun.
Absolutely.
As opposed to this is the routine. Yes, having a routine, it can be useful. They're landmarks, etc. And they can give you a sense of stability when you've got a chaotic life. But when you're having fun, part of what you're having fun is it's the unexpected.
That's what spontaneity.
That's what makes us laugh. Is it's the things that that we don't. It's the unexpected. That's what sort of was it Charlie Chaplin? I think somebody said to him, if Charlie Chaplin was the genius of Charlie Chaplin was, if you saw a scene and he was walking towards a banana skin, he wouldn't slip on the banana skin. He'd pick it up and then fall down a manhole because he was looking at the banana skin. It's that unexpected, and that's the genius, Yes. It's that sort of thing.
It's always the unexpected that gives us giggles and laughter, and it's like those are joy is something that we don't seek out enough, in our relationship with dogs, and just with people.
This is getting me into a very dark place because I'm just wondering if, are people I think, often talk about this with this, I'm so glad that we didn't have smartphones when I grew up. I would not like my childhood to have been recorded on video everywhere. And I just wonder if with smartphones, people are...
See, I feel the opposite. I wish I did.
Oh no, see, I just wonder if that's part of the anxiety of people, that you're going to get caught out on video and it could come back to haunt you. So people aren't willing to goof around. Now, I can goof around because, well, I don't care, to be honest. And I'm fortunate that I've reached a stage in my career where it doesn't really matter, I do remember.
Right. That's it. Yes, because and you've been lauded as one of the top 1%, 2% of scientists as far as research.
Well,
I have to just
that's very kind
toot
of you.
Your horn here.
But yeah, so.
But yes.
And actually, when we had the Canine Science Forum at Lincoln, we had a medieval banquet. Because we managed to hire the castle one evening, and the castle's opposite the cathedral. You have to come over to Lincoln, and I'll show you around.
Oh, I'd love to.
Anyway, we had a big banquet there, and it was a medieval banquet, and there was a prize for the best costume. And my wife went as the queen, and I just got some Hessian sacking and some coal, blacked my face with dirt, and put some false teeth in of rotten teeth and put a bit of Hessian sack around me and went as a peasant. And it was so funny because there were certain people from, should we say, a certain part of the world, and I won't say which, and they couldn't get the idea that a professor would dress down like this.
Right.
And they were just like, yeah, I'm just having fun. I don't
You're
care.
having fun. Exactly.
But a lot of people seem to be afraid to have fun, and I think that's really sad. As I said, just to goof around.
Exactly. And my father was not afraid to lose his dignity, when it had to do with chaser and having fun. And people, I think that kids and dogs, again, they naturally play. And they have this natural joy that somehow gets stomped out, that eventually with us in life, when we're trying to learn things, and this is appropriate, that's not appropriate. And which actually kind of dovetails us into sort of obedience training. Obedience is strictly for safety. And my father believed firmly it was not the goal of your relationship. Obedience is never the goal of any relationship. It should strictly be used for safety and not as a mechanism to control or punish. It should never be a punishment. So when we can have joy and play, without stomping out that light that makes us shine inside. And dogs remind us of this. Dogs have this magical and practical purpose in life. And part of that magic is being able to be in the moment and show us the value of that moment and how they can enjoy the small things in life. And if we can experience the world a little more in those ways, we're going to make their lives richer. We're going to make our lives richer.
But that's also the thing, and I've said this for, there isn't another species on the planet that can meet a complete stranger and within a few seconds be rolling around having fun with them. If we do that, we get arrested.
Right. Of course.
or our partners leave us. That's
right.
But dogs do that, and I know Clive Wynne.
Right.
Dog is love. I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but dogs are play certainly. And I do like Ray Coppinger's view. That we have there's pedomorphic traits there, and by selecting for dogs to be more pedomorphic, they're going to be more playful because play is something you see much more in younger animals.
Right.
But I want to rewind because I want to go completely off topic and rewind. You said You
Okay.
wish you had grown up when there were smartphones and your life was on video. Now, I'm just wondering, is this the artist in you coming out? This is my gross generalization. Why would you want to have grown up with everyone catching your life on smartphones?
Um, I well, there are things that happened in my childhood that I wish I had um, a documentation of, and while I agree with you to a certain degree, yes, that smartphones are not great for all of our relationships, and especially with dogs. But I think they do have value. It's like
Oh yeah.
uh, I would have, yeah, there were moments with my horse that I wish that I'd had video footage of. And also, video footage is great to show us what we're getting wrong. As a
Yeah,
musician,
that's right. That's exactly why I don't want it of my childhood.
right.
It's too much video footage of that.
That, but then those are giggles. Those end up being
Oh
giggles. And
no, no, no! I can tell.
cringeworthy.
No, they're not
Yeah.
giggles. I can tell you, they're legal
Okay.
cases.
Right. Okay. Well, I did not have that kind of a
Okay.
colored background in my life. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I can see your point. But I
Okay.
think that they have value, and then they become detriments as well. So it's always finding that balance.
But
Um,
I also wonder, because we can so easily record so much, and it goes back to what you were saying to me actually about names. Because we record things, and my kids say this to me because I often take a camera out with me. Dad, just enjoy the moment
mm,
and the memory.
yes,
And there is a danger that you get so roped up into trying to capture the moment that you lose
you don't
the most.
experience the
Yeah, you don't
moment.
experience the moment. And
Mm.
is it
I
was
I
it I
I
think it,
agree with that. I
now
agree. I
I
think
think it's
that
in this. I think it's at the end of the book, isn't it? Sorry, because I've been reading quite a lot recently. But
Mhm.
is it is it expression that the three things you need in life? There's
Right,
the poetry,
right.
what was it,
Mythology and
and
science.
science. Yeah. So I knew the science and the poetry, and it's sort of, if you look at the Age of Enlightenment, you had the birth of science, and we went from the idea that we know very little about the world, but here's a way that we can know the world. But at the same time, you then have the romantics, and you have some of the greatest poetry of the time. And it was, you know, they were saying, yeah, understand it, that's fine, but this is the experience of it. Um,
That's
and
yes,
and I think
that's
that's really nice. But I hadn't heard the mythology bit until I'd read that the other day. Um,
well, and mythology also
mm,
encompasses a lot of things. So mythology can be anything from religion, um,
I'm gonna
folklore.
get a few unlikes for
Mm.
that.
Oh, okay. Well, there's religion. There's a lot of each. There's okay. We won't
No,
touch that, but I
uh,
can say that being a preacher's
yeah,
daughter,
yeah,
I've
that's true.
learned a
Yeah,
lot about religion,
yeah.
but and the metaphors in the Bible
Mm,
or in a different great books, there are a lot of them the same, but also mythology has to do with what my father had written, sort a TED talk that he never got to make, but he was talking about the concrete world. And so in the concrete world, what we do is we try to have meaning to things that we do. And there can be, that's when sometimes we romanticize the experience. It's like you're talking about being in the moment of the experience. And so by taking a concrete experience and adding that emotional side to it, this is a form of mythology. This is sort of a different way of experiencing the world, because in order to be uh, grounded in the concrete world, it has to have meaning to us. So that's part of experiencing the world, is adding, if you've got something in your head, it's not meaningful until it meets the heart.
yeah. And well, that's a lot of my research is all about, yeah, emotion, and it's what it means to you. And to me, that's what emotion is. It's about what is personally important to you. You know, we might both like
Right.
chocolate, but you know, my desire for chocolate might be completely different to yours.
Right.
You know, I would kill
Yes,
you. I would
exactly.
kill you over it. uh,
I would hand it over.
but you know, but yeah. So that and that, you know, and it's I find it a fascinating area because again, it's something which is so obviously important, but something that has been terribly neglected in.
Mm,
I mean, well, even when it comes to human emotion, there's no consensus on what an emotion is. Um,
right.
and
Right.
but you know, there's the experience of emotion, and as you say, that experience is. So this is one of the things.
It's very abstract.
So because you're a musician, and let's say if your husband wants to come in on this, he's welcome to as well.
Hmm.
So I've started to sort of play about with this idea, and I'll just try and air it again. So
Hmm.
imagine, um, so if I go to a concert and I listen to you play, I might think that's nice, yeah.
Hmm.
Now, if your husband goes and listens to you sing and perform, he will take out so much more from that experience than I will. Not because he's your husband, well, quite apart from being your
Right.
husband, but because he is also a musician. He can appreciate things that I can't.
Right. He views it with
So,
from a different lens.
so the thought that I have is actually what he has is a different type of consciousness when it comes to music to me. I love
No,
music, but I
he
cannot
hasn't.
I cannot tell you if a note is higher or lower than another. Seriously, I could not tell you. I love music. You know, if we went downstairs, I have a big music. Well, I think is a big music collection anyway. Um, but I could not tell you whether one note is higher or lower than another, and I have a fairly eclectic taste in music. But it's like a fine wine. You know, I like a glass of wine, but if I go with a wine buff, they're telling me about all these other things that I'm just not aware of in it. I just think, yeah, that's nice. I like that.
Right. Right. Well,
And
it's the same. Yeah.
and so
That does.
this is where I'm going with this. For what it's worth, grab a drink, grab your drink, get ready for this. So that comes about not because of who the person is, but because of what they know. So knowledge and experience actually builds your consciousness.
In
And
that area, it does.
yeah,
Yes.
so
Hmm.
if we, so this is where it starts to get difficult. If we think about non-human animals and we think about the experiences they have, if we start to introduce experiences to them and then deprive them of those opportunities, they're going to suffer in a way that if they'd never had that opportunity, become aware of it. You with me on this?
Suffer is a strong word.
Well,
I
because
think that.
they can now have a desire for something that they can no longer access, as opposed to not being aware that it's even there. You know, and it's like, you know, kids that are abused, they just as kids often they normalize that experience because they don't know any better.
Right.
And then
That
as they
is their
become
normal.
adults, they become more aware, and you know, there's a lot of trauma as a result of that. So you know, I'm going to defend using the word suffer because I think it can result in suffering in some situations. Um, and yeah, so this
For
sort of
sure. For
this
sure.
sort of so there is a paper from Ludwig Huber in the Vienna group, and I reviewed it, and there was quite a bit of dialogue over it because they were saying, well, you know, dogs should be allowed to fulfill their cognitive potential. Now you get a dog like Chaser, and that's fine, but the problem is that their potential grows the more you give them the opportunity. And
It's true. Just like humans.
yeah,
Hmm.
now I'm not, you know, and you know, the root of I think a lot of happiness is because people become more aware of what, you know, well, things like rewards are relative. You know, I could be quite happy with, you know, earning £10 an hour, if I wasn't aware that somebody doing the same job as me was earning £20 an hour for doing that job. As soon as I become aware of that, I become dissatisfied with my job.
Well, it's like with Franz de Waal and the chimps,
Mm.
uh,
Reward
the
inequity.
fairness. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like he didn't realize that he had a problem until he saw this one
Mm.
had a crate,
Mm.
So I think that, yes, that sort of exposing and then taking away, I think it's going to hurt. It depends on how long um, the dog or the human has been exposed to something that becomes pleasurable for them. Because after a while, I mean, if I don't have wine, then if I didn't have wine for a couple of days, the first couple of weeks would be hard, but then it would be washed out from my day to day.
My thought is whether or not it's not. As I said, is that there comes a point where certain experiences are going to open up, not just an awareness of that, bottle of wine, but they open up another level of consciousness.
Right.
Consciousness is not either there or not. Consciousness exists in lots of different levels. I can, if I stab my hand with a knife, I go, ouch. Yeah, I've got the pain. There's that. You could tell me about the time you stabbed yourself, and I can sort of, ooh, and I can experience it vicariously. Yeah. Or I could be lying in my bed thinking about, what would happen if I did this, and I can, and they are very different levels of consciousness, but they all involve suffering associated with being stabbed with a knife in those situations.
Right.
And I think it's an ethical issue. How much what we expose the dogs to, but once we unlock that box and open up a certain level of consciousness, so in the case of a dog like Chaser, that now has an understanding of nouns and verbs, etc., do they become hungry for learning more and more?
That's it. I mean, I think that's a good question. It's like you can't ring the bell. But as far as Chaser is concerned, the more that she learned, the more she was able to learn. So even at the end of Chaser's life, she was learning things she could learn very complex behaviors in one trial alone, using verbal cues, visual cues, and imitation. So this is also, so she understood a lot. We knew that she understood more than most people do with their own dogs, and we experienced with her on a daily basis. That being said, yes, if we didn't engage with her constantly, she would become hangdog. She would be a sad dog. So if we were to pull back on giving her experiences that she liked to have on a day-to-day basis, as far as walks and smelling and engaging with people, and throwing balls for her, she was not happy.
So can I ask you?
So that was a responsibility.
Can I ask you a very personal question, and you might not want to answer it, and I'll delete this bit if needs be.
Okay.
How did she cope when your dad died?
That a lot of people have asked that question, and we were wondering what was going to be worse, for him to go first or Chaser to go first, because they were both getting older, and it was inevitable. So the beauty of Chaser is that she was a family dog. So she had my mom, who was constantly tending to her and taking her for walks. She had the neighbors. She had my sister, who was living with my parents. She had me. And so she had a pretty rich life, so that when my father became ill, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and 6 months later he was gone. So she had also had an opportunity to sort of witness him slow down, and we sort of picked up the slack, so that Chaser was kind of okay with it. But when he died and when he was in hospice, she was a little, she didn't love going to see him in his room, and he would reach out to her and she would come over, of course, but she was not a touchy-feely dog. So she would kind of like let him embrace her, and he knew that that wasn't her thing. So he'd let her go and she would be wandering around um, the whole facility. In the room, he had these beautiful doors, that French doors that opened up into a forest, so she could come and go as she pleased. But it was the last day. Well, it was just hours before he died, and she positioned herself right in front of his bed, with her shoulders down, her tail was tucked, her head was down, and she gave him that border collie eye staring straight ahead at him. And she gave out one very sharp, loud bark. And it sort of gave us chills. You know, we just sort of were stunned into silence because Chaser wasn't a barking dog. Yeah. And we knew at that moment that she was not coercing him to get up and get better. She was bidding him goodbye. And it was hours later that he passed. So they had that moment that's, I don't know what it was, but it was something. There was an energy in the room. There was something that she connected to, and then she was okay. You know, Chaser was okay.
Okay. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure it's you know, it's never easy to talk about the loss of your parents. So I do appreciate it. As I said, that's me. I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I'm always okay with people saying no.
Nor should you. I mean, the beauty of my dad is that he had a very rich, incredible life. You know, he had many lives between his years at Princeton and being a minister, and then being a psychology professor, being a whitewater paddler. He was a world-class paddler, and a naturalist, and then involved with his research and with students. That was his real forte, was teaching, and teaching kids how to evaluate research and conduct their own research and methods, and to be super clear. So he used all of these beautiful things at the end of his life to culminate in his greatest work, which was Chaser. Was all, and he was a magical human being. And so when he passed, we were grateful that we'd had as long a run as we did. He was just shy of 90. So I'm glad that he didn't suffer.
Yeah, no, and that's all you can hope for your parents, isn't it? So I've got two other things I was going to sort of chat to you about. I don't know whether we'll get through both of them. I'm conscious of time. Well, one was about your dad's experience of getting published. I know myself, but actually I think the more perhaps the more the more interesting question is, given your sort of immersion in the experience of Chaser, you're familiar with the Genius dogs. Adam McClosey, they've taken a group of dogs, and Juliana's trying to do the same with some dogs that are learning language. And I just wonder your thoughts and observations on what's going on there, good, bad, and ugly.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. So that's a lot to unpack there. And the first thing, one of the first things I want to comment on is that my father believed that the greatest leaps in science occur when there's a one-on-one bond between the animal and the human. And we see the greatest research with Lewis Herman and the dolphins, Phoenix and Akekanei, with Kanzi, the chimp and Sue Savage Rumbaugh. We've got it with Irene Pepperberg and Alex. We've got it with countless other animals. And now Chaser is in this elite. Chaser and Dad join this elite group of courageous researchers, that devoted their life to this unique bond between them and another species. So his hope was that researchers would take his methods with Chaser, because they're greater than, it's not just the toys, it's not just the amount of words, it's about building a language, and he was hoping that they would take his methods with their own dogs and take it to even greater heights, because there's a blueprint, there's a methodology, and to teach dogs language, and then have them understand verbs, then also qualifying words, adverbs, adjectives. So Chaser was able in her later years, and this was even in her early years, she was able to incorporate nouns and verbs with independent meaning. And he was also able to teach her words like bigger, smaller, faster, slower, so that if we had her find a stick in the yard, we'd say, find another stick. And so she understood that stick was one object, but it was also a common noun.
Yeah.
And so if we asked her to find a bigger stick or smaller stick, so she had a huge understanding of language and understanding concepts like, again.
Just in relation to that, I don't know if you know, a number of years ago, we actually had a dog called Gable, who had a big vocabulary, relatively big, over 50 different objects. And we did some experiments to look at what were the characteristics that Gable used to try and understand a word association. And so basically we might have an object we'd call a DAX, and we'd teach Gable that this object was a DAX, and let's say it was that they tended to be made out of the sort of foam that you use in swimming pools for, floats for people. So we'd cut out, let's say, a U-shaped thing, and we teach Gable this was a DAX. Then what we did is we gave Gable a choice, to go and fetch a DAX, and there would be a much bigger U-shaped thing, and most humans would probably go and fetch that. There would be a U, rather than a U-shaped. For the people just listening to this, if you imagine two parts of the U, but the third part, rather than going up again, comes down, so it looks more like a thunderbolt.
A Z.
Yeah. Same size though as the other one, or different textures. It's the same, different textures and whatever. And what we found in the case of Gable, and I think there is reference to it in the book with Chaser as well. But from Gable's perspective, the DAX was the similar sized object, regardless of shape. And shape wasn't important. And the thought was that if you're a dog, well, first of all, Gable was retrieving things in her mouth, so maybe the weight and things like that were quite important. But as humans, we're hunter-gatherers. So actually the shape of things are really important to us. First of all, the shape, as tool users, tells you what you can do with something. If it's a hammer shaped, you use it for banging in a nail. Yeah.
Has associative value.
Yeah. Whereas, and equally, different shaped berries could be completely different things. It could be poisonous or it could be edible. So shape is very important to us. But in a dog's world, shape probably isn't. In a natural way, if you think about it, they're not tool users. And the sort of food, it doesn't matter whether it's moose shaped or cow shaped, it's still food, and it was just the fact that it was size that they were using, and but that doesn't mean they can't learn to use shape. But it looked like the intuitive or the natural drift was towards size. But as I said, we unfortunately Gable got ill, and also had sore knees, so we didn't get to do as much work as we liked. Because one of the other things we'd like to have done is, something that didn't involve picking up the object, and just see whether or not in the same experiment, whether you would still get this size analogy. So if anybody's out there with dogs with these multiple languages, there's an awful lot that we can still do. But sorry, that was just a side point. I didn't know whether or not you were aware of that bit of work that we did, which I found quite interesting, that the dogs with the size. But yeah, you were saying about some of these smart dogs.
She would understand. For instance, if we were out walking, she understood a tree, and we'd say find another tree, and she would find another tree. If we say find a bigger tree, she was able to find a bigger tree, find a smaller tree.
So pigeons can recognize a Rembrandt. You know that. You can teach them. So you can teach pigeons all sorts of weird. They can pick out different artists. It's really, the concepts that they can learn.
It's well, that's the thing. Is it's like also it's being on the same page as the dog. There's so many ways that we can think we're conveying, find this or find that, when their perception, it could be a little bit different from ours. And we see this in dog training and people working with their dogs and thinking they're getting them the right cue, and they're not. And I discovered this one day with Chaser when I asked her to find another tree, and she went to a stop sign. And I was like, no, Chaser, that's a sign, find a tree. And she's like, okay. But anything that was tall and kind of had something on top of it. So it's these sort of realizations that, yes, they, because dogs with a lot of these objects don't have associative value. And that's the way what's unique about dogs learning the names of objects, or especially with Chaser, is that it was rote memorization. And there was I think there's some sort of savant thing going on, that she could cement a SpongeBob. She knew SpongeBob only because of the shape he was, what he looked like, and rote memory, pairing the name of the object with the object. She didn't know that he lived in a pineapple under the sea. The way we learn, and even the way children learn, is by when it's exclusion learning, or by reference, when you've got a fork and a knife, and then you're like, use the spoon, and they go, okay, it must be the spoon because it's the one thing I don't know. But it has a function to cement this object into a child's brain, into our brains. There's a function that's associated with it. And there's also repetition. That's the other thing that people don't get, is repetition is key. If you teach, and I'm going off on a tangent here, but with the exclusion learning and fast mapping, yes, Chaser could learn things easily with fast mapping, and knowing it's the one object on the floor that she doesn't know what it is, she'll pick up and she'll realize that's Darwin. But to get this into her long-term memory, there needs to be rehearsal. Just with anybody, there needs to be rehearsal. So a lot of the studies that are coming out, they're like, well, with some of the testing methods with the exclusion learning that I've seen with the Genius Dog Challenge, is that they're not taking into account that testing is very complicated for dogs and animals and humans. And that was one of the hardest nuts to crack with my father and Chaser, is that how to not wear her out with testing that's not fun. And even with dogs, when you give them two objects and expect them to find the novel object, okay, is it the novel object or is it the rehearsed object? First of all, that sort of testing has a 50% success or fail rate. The way Dad tested Chaser was an 8 of 8, so that he would have her find familiar toys first out of the 8 objects, and then he would ask her to find the novel object. So there's methods to there's a methodology to testing. There's a methodology to learning, where it's like, say you get a piece of furniture from IKEA. If you leave one step out, what happens next is cattywampus. It's not going to end well. Yeah. this is the same with dogs and children and learning anything. There are steps that are going to help us succeed and get there faster. And when getting back to what my dad was hoping and how we think about some of these other projects, if they would utilize his methods, they would see a lot more success. We also have to assume that dogs can learn, that all dogs have this ability, so that when we try to categorize an animal as a genius and a non-genius, that's divisive, that's exclusionary. If every person, every human being has their fortes and their weaknesses, we also have our own desires of what makes us tick. If I had been forced to have a career in math and do something I didn't like to do, I would be considered a very stupid person and a stupid dog. But once I'm in music or talking about dogs, I'm excited. This same sweet spot happens with animals. To assume that each animal is not an individual and they're all painted with one large brush is we're missing the point.
So we a number of years ago, we did a summer exhibition at the Royal Society in London. And one of the things we produced from it, there was this deck of cards, which was dogs with important jobs. And we just sort of sat down and thought, well, what are the cognitive abilities required for different tasks? So a guide dog versus a courthouse dog versus a sheep dog, etc. And much to our amazement, these cards were so popular with the teachers that came along, because they said, yeah, this is what kids need to learn, is that you're not a failed guide dog, you're a sheep dog.
Right.
And I think this is a real problem that we have with education at the moment. I can understand why we have a relatively fixed curriculum, and I'm sure the same goes in the States, but too much of it is fixed. That there's not enough. I think there should be a core curriculum, absolutely, but probably 50% of it should be allowing children to pursue their passions. And find
exactly.
or not pursue their passions, find their passions, I think, is the most important thing, rather than pursue it, because most kids don't know what their passion is. They're being told,
know what it is.
People are trying to dictate to them what their passions should be. Do this and you'll get a good job, and it was just, as when I was at school, it was sort of, well, you're getting really good grades. The career that demands the highest grades is vet school. Go and be a vet. And if you can't be a vet, be a human doctor. I'm thinking,
right. It's like, but what made you shine? What sparked you? And that was what my father was really great at in teaching, is extracting your bliss, and what he was remarkable with as far as chaser and genius. He didn't like when she was called a genius or that she was the smartest dog in the world. He's like, there's no way we know if she is the smartest dog in the world. That was his science speaking. But genius, we discovered the true meaning for chaser, and what we believe for most kids and humans is Thomas Armstrong is an educator out in California, and he describes it well. Genius is a combination of the inherent meaning of the word is a combination of two words: Genesis, which means to begin, to beget, to give birth to, and jovial, which is joy. So genius is a combination of these two words, which our interpretation is giving birth to one's joy. So that's what was so successful with Chaser, is Dad used her innate gifts for her learning. And anytime, most kids don't even know what those are. It's our job as parents, as educators, to sit down and have conversations like these. These are the moments where you really do discover, what people are and who they are and who they want to be. So, yeah.
I think that is such a good point at which to actually bring this to an end, that we all need to find our genius. We need to begin doing the things that we really love. I've really loved chatting to you this evening. I should say to people, if if I get this edited in time and it's before Christmas and you're still looking for a Christmas gift for somebody who's interested in dogs, even if it's yourself, go and buy yourself the book Chaser. It's a great read. And if I haven't got this out before Christmas, just treat yourself to it anyway, because it's a lovely story. And as you say, it is infused with love as well as the genius of your father, as well as the genius of Chaser as well. And I really enjoyed reading it. And I sort of, as I said, I love that point that it's about finding what in every animal, whether they're human or not, finding out what makes them tick.
Right.
So
yeah,
thanks a lot for a lovely session, and hopefully we'll
Thank you,
catch
Dan.
up in person before too long, COVID permitting.
Yes, that
Take
sounds
care.
great. Okay.
Take care now, and all the best.
Bye. Yes.